Hello, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for clicking on this video. I sort of tried to emulate this lovely lady I saw on TikTok who did this like bat wing Halloween tutorial. I'll leave her TikTok user handle, whatever, below. But obviously it doesn't look as good as her, but I tried. It took me over an hour, so please appreciate me. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about the Jerry Springer show and the story that resulted in murder, as reality television often does for some reason. Before I get into it, please think or give some thought to maybe subscribing to my channel if you like true crime or commentary content. I put a lot of work into these videos, so it would mean a lot to me. And then let's get into it. The Jerry Springer Show aired for 28 seasons from September 30th, 1991 to July 26, 2018. The show was hosted by none other than Jerry Springer himself, who has quite the interesting history or career before he entered the realm of TV show hosting. Jerry first started off his professional career in politics. He is a registered Democrat. He was a political campaign advisor to Robert F. Kennedy before he was assassinated in 1968. He then was elected into city council in Cincinnati in 1971, but he had to resign in 1974 after it was found out that he had solicited a sex worker. But this little incident didn't end his political career because he became the mayor of Cincinnati in 1977. He was only mayor of Cincinnati for 1 year because of some weird law that was in place at the time in the city, which required if a Democrat was elected, they would have to split half of their mayoral run with a third party candidate in the city. After his political career seemed to stall and he wasn't getting elected for anything else, Jerry became a political commentator and reporter for NBC's Cincinnati station WLWT. He remained a political commentator with WLWT until 1993, who cut ties with him at that time because he was becoming more controversial. After years of being an uber successful political commentator, Jerry Springer and WLWT decided to give him his own talk show. They went on to call it the Jerry Springer Show, and it was a talk show that was supposed to be about politics and social justice issues, which is very interesting considered what it became. It remained a political show for around 2 years and broached a variety of really serious topics such as gun control, homelessness, racism, AIDS, and domestic violence. But the show wasn't a hit like they'd hoped. Not as many people were tuning in to watch Jerry talk about politics, so the producers and I guess Jerry decided to completely change the format of the television show and make it this sort of trashy, salacious fight show, I guess you could say. They started to mimic sort of tabloids, and instead of talking about relevant social issues, they focused on topics like affairs, closeted LGBTQ plus individuals, incest, etc. The show became quickly known for its violence and chaos and just salaciousness, continuing to push the bar into what was acceptable to put on daytime television. So each episode would feature a central topic. For example, one episode was called A Man Marries a Horse, and the whole episode would feature multiple guests around like 3 or 4 stories. The main premise of the show was that a guest would come on and like expose or reveal a secret to the audience or someone else. For example, a husband would come on and reveal to his wife that he was having an affair with her sister or something stupid like that. Or someone would go on the show to confront someone else. So like a wife or husband would come on to confront their spouse's mistress or mister. The show would ideally end in a brawl or a violent screaming match, and the audience, which was mostly like college-aged people, would cheer and yell while they brawled. The content was a far cry from Jerry's roots, which was serious political commentary, but he made millions of dollars off the show in his 20 plus years that it ran. As a result of the topics that the show featured and just its trashiness, it was pretty widely hated, but people would just tune in and sort of hate watch it. The show took a dark turn after an episode that was filmed on May 2nd, 2000, premiered in July 2000, and was called Secret Mistresses Confronted. One of the stories featured on that episode was that of Ralph Jurgen Panitz, who was 40, and his second wife, Ellie Panitz, who was 45, who both went on the show to confront or expose Ralph's first wife or ex-wife. I'm not sure if it was his first. His ex-wife, Nancy Campbell, who was 52, of stalking them. It's unclear how Ralph and Nancy met. When I was doing my research, that information wasn't readily available, so I'm not sure, but it was published in some articles that the couple was only married for 15 months before filing for divorce in 1999. Ralph met his second wife, Eleanor, nicknamed Ellie, who I'll refer to her as Ellie throughout this story, in 1999 online. It's sort of unclear for me whether or not the relationships overlapped with Nancy and Ellie, probably, knowing the type of man that Ralph is. Ellie said that she immediately fell in love with Ralph, and the couple had a lot in common, including they liked the same books and movies. They were also both getting separated while they met online, so they sort of bonded over their mutual divorces. After both their divorces were finalized, Ellie and Ralph married in a civil ceremony on March 17th, 2000. Ellie was so enamored with Ralph, but her sister, Joanne Isaac, didn't really like him because she believed that Ralph was taking advantage of Ellie. Their mother was also very concerned about Ellie and confided in Joanne that she was afraid that Ralph was physically abusive to Ellie. She even told Joanne that she was fearful that one day Ralph would murder Ellie. Ellie seems dismissive to this day of her mother's concerns. She says that her mother was suspicious of Ralph just because he was so much better looking than Ellie, so he must have been wanting a green card. Ralph was a German citizen at the time. This point is really dumb to me because Ralph really isn't that attractive. He kind of just looks like any other middle-aged white European man, so I don't think that's a valid sort of statement from Ellie, but she's very enamored with Ralph, so it's not surprising to me that she believes he's the bee's knees. Anyways, back to the Jerry Springer show. Ellie and Ralph alleged that Ralph's first wife, Nancy, was stalking them. Ellie claimed that everywhere the couple went, for example, to go out to eat, Nancy would be there. Ralph says he believes that Nancy was evil and wicked and was just trying to destroy his marriage with Nancy because she was bitter and jealous. Ellie and Ralph stated that Nancy's alleged stalking was getting worse, so they decided to apply and appear on the Jerry Springer show so they could get her to stop stalking them. That seems like a really stupid idea to me. Like, I feel like if she was truly stalking them, that would just aggravate her more and give her more ammunition. Ellie's sister Joanne, who is by far the most rational and therefore my favorite in this case, said that she thought that was the stupidest idea ever. Same girl. She also couldn't understand why, if Nancy was truly stalking Ralph and Ellie, that they would instigate or anger her by confronting her on national television. Joanne said the entire thing was just embarrassing to Ellie and their family. Ellie's friend claimed that it was Ralph who was the driving force for the couple appearing on the show, which I believe, because he, quote, wanted to let Nancy know that she didn't matter to him anymore. So now it's May 2000 and Ralph and Ellie have been married for a couple months, and all three show up for their taping of the Jerry Springer show. Nancy was under the impression that Ralph was going to announce that he was leaving Eleanor, and to lure Nancy out to the taping, the producers and Ralph had put her under the impression that their sort of story was going to be Ralph announcing to Eleanor that he was leaving her to return to Nancy, because obviously she wouldn't have appeared on the show had she known the actual story. Obviously, this wasn't what Ralph and Ellie had planned. They just wanted to embarrass Nancy. After Ralph and Eleanor told Nancy that they didn't want anything to do with her and they wanted her to leave them alone, and that they also told her that they had been married in March in a civil ceremony behind her back, Nancy told Eleanor that her and Ralph had slept together the night prior. Eleanor sort of dismisses this confession and continues to be awful to Nancy. She just repeatedly calls her fat and old and gets the audience to join in and chant that Nancy is fat and old. So Eleanor seems great. So Nancy's like, fine, whatever, you guys are together, and then she leaves the stage without incident. The couple don't end up brawling. Apparently, Ellie decided to blame Nancy and the producers for Ralph's infidelity than Ralph himself. She said the producers sort of trapped Ralph because they put them all in the same motel. So, like, obviously Ralph had to sleep with Nancy because they were in the same hotel. Also, like, where does she think Ralph was the night before? If he just left her alone in the hotel to go to Nancy? Very confusing. Ellie is very deluded. Even though Ellie initially said that she forgave Ralph for his infidelity, the couple started fighting incessantly and they decided to separate a month after the taping around June. She left the home they shared together and started staying with a friend. After she left, Ralph decided to rekindle his relationship with Nancy, and the couple even put a down payment on a house together. But their reconciliation didn't last long, and Ralph began emailing Ellie in early July 2000 to come back and return to him, even though he was still in the relationship with Nancy at the time and the pair were living together. Ellie obviously didn't take much convincing to return to Ralph, and the two reconciled and forgave each other. Ellie then moved in to the house that Nancy and Ralph had put a down payment on the month prior, which was located in Sarasota, Florida, obviously Florida, and so Nancy moved out. At some point in July, Ralph's nephew Marcus Panitz started staying with Ellie and Ralph at Nancy's house, but Nancy decided that she didn't want to lose the house to Ellie and Ralph, so she went to court to regain possession of it. On July 24th, 2000, the judge decided to grant Nancy possession of the house. She was also granted a restraining order against Ralph after she alleged that he had chased her around the house with a knife and threatened to kill her and her family. As a result of the two legal decisions, Ellie and Marcus had to gather all of the couple's and Marcus's belongings, and then Ralph had to leave the premises right away because of the restraining order. So Ralph left while Marcus and Eli packed up their things, and he went to a local bar. Coincidentally, that day, July 24th, their episode of the Jerry Springer show was set to air at 3 p.m. So Ralph went to the bar and decided to watch his episode while he got drunk. Ellie claims that Ralph was so upset that he was going to lose the house that he tried to complete suicide by walking into the middle of the road and trying to get hit by a car, but the car swerved out of the way and didn't hit him. Ralph then returns to the Sarasota house a few hours later after drinking and watching his Jerry Springer episode, and he returns to the house even though legally he has a restraining order and is not allowed to be at Nancy's Nancy's residence. Instead of vacating him from the house like they should have, Eli and Marcus decided to tuck Ralph into one of the beds in the house so he can sleep off his drunkenness. At this point, Ellie and Marcus notice that there is a police car on the driveway, and then they look out and they see Nancy with a police officer, and they're talking on the driveway at the house. To avoid Ralph getting arrested for breaching the terms of their restraining order, Ellie and Marcus decide to sneak him out of the bedroom window and tell him to go down the street to the 7-Eleven, and then they'll meet him there and pick him up. Ellie and Marcus went to drive off, but by the time they reached the end of the street, Ellie told Marcus to get out of the car and return or walk back to the Sarasota house because she feared that, quote, Ralph was going to go back into the house and kill Nancy. So Marcus did as he was told and walked back to the house, and Ellie parked at the end of the street and waited. Marcus tried to enter the front door of the house, but there was something barricading and he couldn't get in, so he panicked, believing that Nancy was in danger inside, so he went to the neighbor's house, who called 911. This part is super sketchy and sort of leads me to believe that Ellie was more involved in Nancy's murder than she lets on. So instead of staying put at the end of the street, she starts driving around the neighborhood, just repeatedly circling the neighborhood, and just happens to come across Ralph walking. To me, it sort of seems like Ellie knew what Ralph was going to do, and she was circling to find him because she was the getaway car. So Ralph gets in the car with Ellie and they drive away and just leave Marcus at the crime scene. A few minutes later, officers who were called by Marcus and the neighbor enter the Sarasota residence and discover Nancy's dead body on the kitchen floor. She had been beaten and strangled to death. Her injuries to her face were so severe that it was initially hard to identify her, but her blood was everywhere, all over the kitchen and all over the house. Investigators immediately noticed that there was a bloody footprint on the kitchen floor as well as on Nancy's face, which meant that Ralph had stepped on her face after she was deceased or was dying. This became the major piece of forensic evidence. Meanwhile, Ralph and Eli are on the run, so Bonnie and Clyde, they probably wish they were Bonnie and Clyde. But police and Ellie's loved ones were fearful, or they didn't know if Ellie was a hostage of Ralph and was going to be another victim, or if she was sort of in on the plot. Ellie and Ralph managed to evade arrest and police for 4 days following Nancy's murder. Ellie, to this day, claims that her and Ralph weren't fleeing because Ralph had killed Nancy, that they were actually fleeing because Nancy was trying to deport Ralph. Either way, Ralph and Ellie turned themselves in to Sarasota police. Ellie said that they only found out that Nancy had been murdered after her father phoned her and informed her of this. I obviously don't believe Ellie's events that she's trying to put forward to make it look like Ralph wasn't the murderer. There was no one else that had the motive and had the time to kill Nancy, so it's absolutely absurd to me that Ellie is still trying to say that Ralph wasn't the one that brutally beat Nancy to death. I think that Ellie and Ralph didn't turn themselves in because they heard about Nancy's death, like Ellie tries to say, but I think they knew they were trapped by police. So police believed that Ellie and Ralph were headed to Maine, where Ellie had family and relatives, which was near the Canadian border. It is believed that the couple was trying to seek refuge in Canada. Ralph was going to go to the German embassy that's located in Canada for help, and Ellie would go on a reservation because she was Indigenous. I think on the phone call with her dad, he told Ellie that there was police waiting for them in Maine to arrest them. Ellie and Ralph decided to just turn themselves into Sarasota police because their way out was gone. When they turned themselves in, Ralph, because he's an idiot, was wearing the same shoes that he was wearing on the the day that he murdered Nancy. Marcus confirmed that these were the shoes that he was wearing. So they immediately confiscated his shoes to perform forensics on them, and they found Nancy's blood on the soles of his shoes. They were Skechers, if that matters. They also found Ralph's DNA under Nancy's fingernails after the coroner did an autopsy and forensics on her body. He was then charged with the first-degree murder of Nancy. At his trial, which took place in 2002, it was revealed that Ralph would often rotate between the two women. One night he would spend with Nancy and then the next with Ellie. It is evident, at least to me, that he was just playing the two women, whether it be for residency or intimacy, because he knew that they both were manipulated and abused enough by him that they wouldn't leave. Perhaps because it seemed that Nancy was finally ready to leave him. She had the restraining order out on him. She had possession of the house. Ralph became so enraged that he murdered her. The prosecution during the trial also outlined a long history of incidents of domestic violence between Ralph and Nancy. I couldn't find any individual reports online of specific incidents, but it just says they had a long history of involvement with the police. In March 2002, Ralph was found guilty of second-degree murder and breaching the terms of the restraining order out against him, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. From what I know, Ellie is still married to Ralph, and every weekend she visits him. She gives him money for stuff in jail. I don't know what you need money for in jail. I'm not versed on that, but she provides for him. She's still dedicated to him. She's isolated herself so that Ralph's her whole life. It's so disgusting to me that she obviously has to know that Ralph murdered Nancy, and she still is dedicating her life and supporting this murderer. Anyways, that's all for the Nancy, Ralph, and Ellie story. But to bring it back to the Jerry Springer show, I saw an article sort of speculating on what the producers of trash television shows like Jerry Springer and like Jeremy Kyle, The Maury Show, blah blah blah, can do for the guests on their show to help them, because they're often exploiting these guests for their traumatic experiences, and then they just let them go and never follow up with them and never see how they're doing. It also had to be traumatic for Nancy to be embarrassed this way by someone she loved and cared about on national television, and the producers exploited that and didn't bother to follow up with Nancy afterwards. Anyways, I read an article that was talking about the damage that this does, because there are a lot of cases where television shows like this end in violence, like domestic intimate partner violence, end in murders, end in stuff like that, just messy stuff. And this, I believe, man was talking about what he thinks the shows should do to rectify this problem that they create, in my opinion. He said that it should be mandatory to counsel or follow up with the guests on the show and see if they need any additional resources or stuff like that. And I 100% agree. Jerry Springer made millions and millions of dollars off of the Jerry Springer show from exploiting the trauma of random everyday individuals. The least he could do, in my opinion, was follow up and connect them to resources and make sure they were in a safe position so that nothing bad would happen or they weren't gonna rage and murder someone. You know what I'm saying? I think this was a preventable situation if the Jerry Springer show did follow up and did help Nancy. I don't even think they should have put the couple on the show because they did have a history of domestic violence. Anyways, the two sons of Nancy did try to sue the Jerry Springer show. I think they settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but Jerry and the producers deny that their show exacerbated or caused the death of Nancy, which of course I don't fully agree with. Well, that's all for now. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment your opinion on this case and what you think about television shows like Jerry Springer, and I'll see you next time.